Welcome to Liner Notes. My name is David Bixler.
On his new recording, Something About Believing, tenor saxophonist Tim Armacost is joined by trumpeter Tom Harrell and baritone saxophonist Gary Smulyan, as well as the outstanding rhythm section of bassist John Patitucci and drummer Al Foster. Listening to the music, one is struck by the comfortability of master improvisers doing what they do best. However, in this episode of Liner Notes, Tim explains that this recording is a snapshot of a journey that he embarked on a number of years ago while exploring synesthesia. The project began as a chordless quartet in which the musicians worked with lighting designer Liz Liebeskind in real time. And beyond this recording, Armacost has assembled a new quartet that is working with visual artist Mary Shah, who is creating her response to the band while performing live.
Tim Armacost, welcome to Liner Notes. Good to see you. We are here to speak about your new recording, Something About Believing, on TMA Records, which I assume is your own label, and I'd like to touch on that later on. But first, welcome. Record sounds great, as you know, with the personnel, yourself, of course, on tenor saxophone, Gary Smulyan on baritone saxophone, Tom Harrell on the trumpet, and rhythm section of John Patitucci and Al Foster. Congrats, bro. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, it's kind of fun to hear you list that list of names.
Yeah. No, sure. I mean, it's impressive, and it's very evident when you hear the music, and and one of the things that you shared with me earlier with this group was this caliber player. You chose the material and then just let it rip. You know what's going to happen. I mean, you don't know what's going to happen, but you know it's going to be good. And,
you know what's going to happen.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
I got a lesson from Ray Drummond kind of early in my career. It was one of the, it wasn't actually, I'd been touring for about 10 years already, so I wasn't entirely green, but it was the first time I took a band under my own name to Europe. And after about I think we were out for 3 weeks, and after about the first week, Ray Drummond took me aside and he said, "You know what I love about Miles Davis?" And I said, "No, tell me." He said, he chose great band members and then he turned them loose. And I don't think I was trying to be controlling of the band up until that point. I think that was sort of intuitively what I was trying to do. So I don't think he was sort of trying to straighten me out about something I wasn't doing right. But I hope that what he was doing was pushing me further in the direction that I was already going, and confirming that that was a good choice. Like, don't tell us what to do, man. Just turn us loose. We'll deliver for you. And that's been kind of my operating philosophy ever since. Of course, when you do original music, you have to be a little more demanding and rehearse a little harder. But in this particular case, we had minimal rehearsal on purpose, and I just picked music that I thought everybody could sink their teeth into, and yeah.
All right. So one of the things that I thought was very interesting, the original concept, and this is going back a number of steps, so I'm going to ask you to connect the dots. This was a project that started based on synesthesia. Now,
Yes.
do you, one doesn't suffer from it, but one, had you have it, or is this just kind of a personal thing where you are associating keys with colors, or is it truly visual?
It's a really interesting question because for me, I can think back to about 1986. I was a young musician living in Amsterdam, and I can remember a composition that a friend of mine mostly wrote and then I finished. And I generously gave myself half of the credit for writing this song.
That's why you're sitting in the house that you're in right now, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I wish. I wish. Anyway, I can think back that long ago. So that's like 38 years ago. And that song was Red. It's called Saúde. It's by the guy who started it is an old friend of mine called David Rosenblatt. Really nice, fantastic guitar player. Really great composer. And that song is Red. It's written in the key of G. And when I play that song, I experience the color red. And it's a little bit abstract, I guess. I guess it's kind of hard to put that into something concrete, but that's what it feels like to me. That key feels like red. That's the first moment that I can remember feeling that feeling. And I, of course, had no words for it at that point. I didn't know anything about synesthesia. And then the first composition I wrote called Specifically, which now that I think about it, I don't think I've ever recorded that song. And I think I had to go revisit that one. I think it might be okay. But that one's in the key of A flat, which is a half step away from G. And that's kind of a dark brown. So I guess you could say that those colors are next to each other more or less on a spectrum. But I don't really experience it that way. So the key of F is more like a blue for me. So it doesn't feel like it's something related scientifically to the spectrum of colors. Once I learned about the word synesthesia, I looked into that and I read a few books and I saw that other people, as you say, suffer from this. And actually, it's funny that we laugh about that because it really isn't a suffering at all. It's very beautiful. It's a really beautiful experience for me. And so along about the end of the 90s, I guess, is when I became aware of the word synesthesia. And I, now that I think about it, I think I pursued this idea before I knew there was a name for it. So along through the 90s, the experience became more and more, like for me, it was just natural. It was just a normal part of experiencing playing music live. It wasn't really something I was thinking about. It was just something I experienced. And then I had this idea to start this band, which at the time I called the Chordless Quintet. That was chordless, C-H-O-R-D, chordless. That was the first version of this band. And I hired a kind of an all-around visual artist called Liz Liebeskind. And, well, I talked to her about it and eventually hired her. And I asked her if we could have a dialogue between lighting design and the band improvising. And she said, yeah, that sounds like fun. And so we had, remember the Kitano in the old upstairs room before they moved downstairs. It was a very beautiful, intimate space. And she brought these 2 stacks of lights that were really small and unobtrusive. And so we the cueing system, 4 fingers down is 4 flats and 2 fingers up is 2 sharps. So I took a picture of myself holding my hands up in each position, 1 sharp, 2 sharps, 3 sharps, 4 sharps, and flats. I took a picture of my hand doing each one of those signals, and I gave it to her with 2 sharps, meaning the key of D, which is kind of a light green. So I wrote light green next to my hand with 2 sharps. So she had that key next to her, and when the band was playing in the key of D, I would signal her 2 fingers up, and she would arrange the light to reflect the key that we were playing in. And it was really, really fun. And we developed some different ways to communicate, where sometimes she would throw some light at us, and I would signal to the band, okay, we're improvising freely in the key of F. and so we played compositions, but we also played free, and we also did this back and forth between us and the lighting designer. And I had to tell her, don't throw me colors too fast, because I got to cue everybody, and we have to get into something, give us some time to get into something. And anyway, it became this very fun, interesting dialogue between us and Liz. And that the culmination of that group was Liz and her husband organized a concert in the cove here where I live in Hastings-on-Hudson. We have a little cove down on the banks of the Hudson River. And they built a raft and they put the band on the raft. And we started out with the band against the shore, and we were playing, and it was a raft that was, it was a pretty big, maybe 16 by 16 foot stage on drums, oil drums. And as the tide came in, the river lifted us up and carried us out into the cove. So by the time we were playing midway through this concert, we were floating. And I actually never forget, I was closing my eyes, playing Giant Steps. And when I opened my eyes at the end of my solo, I was floating in the middle of this cove. Anyway, that was just kind of a fun aside. But the other thing we did during that concert was we had lights set up all around the entire cove. And maybe they had maybe they had a pair of binoculars, but we had also rigged up a little keyboard where I would press a key. If we were playing in the key of C, I would press middle C on this little, keyboard, and it would signal lights.
So it would trigger.
It would trigger a light. It would trigger a yellow light in the key of C, and actually that's B flat. If I hit B flat, it would trigger a yellow light. And then they would know from my trigger to fill the environment around the cove with more yellow light. I mean, it was some pretty radical stuff, actually.
That sounds like some serious grant material. Right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
it was way before, this is like 2001, too. It was way before the grant era had arrived. So,
question for you, man. If you're doing Giant Steps, is she changing the colors like every bar?
Yeah, in that particular case, that was more of a sort of key of E flat yellow is what we worked with on that. We didn't really try to we didn't try to go through 2 chords per bar on that one.
All right. The question I had about that then, with this being color driven and key driven, what was the choice of not using a harmonic based instrument in the rhythm section?
Yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't really thought about that. What I really enjoy about 3 horns and bass and drums is that there's a lot of color you can create with the four voices. And I liked the freedom of letting us define it without having it be defined by a chordal instrument. And I've enjoyed playing trio. Actually, playing trio is something I started doing a lot of when I got to New York around 94. So that had become something that I'd grown to like, and the 3 horns, no chordal instrument kind of grew out of just that love. And so we did all this synesthesia stuff, and then around 2003, 4, 5, I think is when I finally learned that there's a word for that and that other people experience it, and there's all this literature around it. So I did a little bit of exploration to see if my experience was a scientific one or more of a personal one. And my conclusion is that my experience is my experience. And some people I've talked to have similar experiences, but I've never met somebody who goes, oh, G is red for me too. What's C for you? Oh, well, that's blue. I've never had that experience with somebody who had an exact match to the way I experience it. So
understood. But it also seems like your audience can enjoy, the lights, the colors that are associated with the music, and have maybe an extra musical experience because of that, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, the idea is to create an environment, kind of like an installation, they call that in the art world, to create a kind of an installation. And I, generally speaking, when I perform, try to stay away from telling the audience what to experience. I don't like it when artists do that to me. So I tend not to do that. But what I do when we're exploring the synesthesia stuff is I tend to say to the audience, in this particular composition, we're going to play and I'm going to signal the lighting designer and she's going to create an environment based on what I signal to her. And in this next composition, she's sending the signals to us. So you can see the signal go, I point to which direction the signals are going. So maybe that's enjoyable for the audience to see how that unfolds.
And then what I understand is through the unfortunate passing of the lighting designer, you kind of shelved this for a minute, but recently started a new chordless group with Smulyan, Patitucci, and Billy Hart. Now, did it have some of the same drive of the synesthesia behind it, or is it just more of a continuation of a multi-horned chordless group?
Yeah, I would say when Liz passed, I put that idea aside for the time being. Actually, I did. Now that I think about it, I did apply for a grant. I got a chamber music grant. I got a chamber music grant for another project in 2007 or so. And the next cycle, I tried pitching a synesthesia project, and I didn't get it. And Liz died shortly after that. So sort of between those two things, I just put that idea to the side. But I had been playing with some regularity with a cordless group with 3 horns, which I really enjoyed. And around that time, I had been living in Hastings for maybe 10 years, around 10 years. And Gary Smulyan and I, Gary also, he's moved just across the border into Yonkers recently, but he lived in Hastings the first 20 years I lived here. And around the time I'd been here for 10 years, we started to run into each other and began to form a friendship. And it was one of those things where the first time we played, it was like, oh, you're one of my brothers. When we went to end a tune, the 2 tones we chose fit together perfectly. We just had a thing. It just felt really natural. And we also feel the time kind of in the same way. So when we play heads together, it feels great. And so that relationship started to become something I wanted to feel more of around, say, 12 years ago. And so Liz was one of the founding members of a little festival we used to have in Hastings called Take Me to the River. And that continued for a while after she passed. And about the 3rd time I played at that festival, now that I think back on it, I invited Billy and Gary and John Patitucci to play. And that felt like a band right away. So we did a handful of gigs with that group, and then we had a gig up here at the Jazz Forum in probably 2017 or 18, and Billy couldn't make that. He was on a tour in Europe, and so it being New York, I thought, well, I can't get Billy Hart. Let me see if Al Foster is available. And I had played with Al a few times over the years. And so I called him up and, yeah, I can make that. Cool. And so that also, John was really excited to play with Al, of course, as all of us were. And that just went in a completely different direction. I mean, musically, that's Al, obviously one of the great voices on his instrument of all time. So he brought a different direction to it. And that gave that cordless quartet at the time new life. And so we did a handful of gigs also with that group, a couple of times at the Jazz Forum. And then I had organized to record the quartet before COVID, and COVID stopped everything. And so eventually we managed to get everybody's schedules back together, and we recorded in 2022. And I thought, wouldn't it be nice to go back to the 3 horns, no chords format? Tom Harrell would be super exciting to have in this group of people. Called him up. Tom, can you make it? Yes, I can make it. And there it is. So we managed to reschedule a couple of years after the original recording date. And I'm thankful for that in the end, because it meant that the idea of Tom joining the group got born out of all of that mess. So it worked out fantastic. And and so the result is the new record.
All right, so let's talk about the material. You alluded to precious little rehearsal time. So how did that play into the material chosen? And, also, I want to point out, you have one composition on the recording. It's really just a blues, and maybe talk a little bit about that because the listener will find that kind of interesting, some recognizable themes to that one. But, how did the rest of the tunes come about,
Yeah, so to take the first one, it's really just a blues. The process of that was on the quartet gigs before we added Tom. Gary and I used to play, referring back to the way we really enjoy playing heads together because our time feel kind of fits together nicely. One of the things we used to do at the gigs was he would play Cheryl and I would play Relaxing at Camarillo, two Charlie Parker blues heads, for those of you who are not familiar with those titles. And Charlie Parker's blues heads, each one of them is super well, beautifully crafted, and they're similar in some really interesting ways, but different enough that what they sound like is counterpoint when you put two of them together. And so to create the original tune that opens the record, what I did was I put Relaxing at Camarillo and Cheryl into my computer so I could listen to them being played simultaneously. And then I made a little melody that fit into the holes that were where there's nobody playing on those, between those two heads. And I gave that theme to Tom. So we start out on the recording. Tom plays my head, which is kind of a sparse little head.
Pithy,
yes. And then I come in with Relaxing, and Gary comes in with Cheryl on top of it. So we layer the three things on top of it. And I think one of my favorite moments on the record is the trading we do with the three of us and Al. So we all three play together, contrapuntally improvising, and then Al takes a chorus. And we go back and forth for 4 or 5 choruses. I really like what happened there.
Yeah, very cool. And do I have the 5 cuts on this recording?
So on the album there are 5, and on the digital release there are 8. And
8.
There's one other of my original compositions.
Oh, okay, right. I like the concept of vinyl because it suits my capacity for concentration. I think
we grew up with that. You could sit down and listen to a side.
Yeah.
And that doesn't take that much concentration. That's only 21 minutes. You can really listen to it. And then if you got time and you're into it, you can flip it over and listen to the other side. It's nice that it's coming back. I'm really happy to be selling LPs. I've got to the point where I found it, I'd ask at the gig if anybody had a CD player, and nobody would raise their hand. And some people would look like, what are you talking? What is a CD player? At that point, I decided it wasn't just me, but I perceived around me that there was some interest in LP. So I decided to start going in that direction. The idea, basically the unifying idea was songs from composers or musicians that are well known, but the songs themselves are not. So on the digital release, we did Monk's Oscar T, and on the album and the digital, of course, we did a tune by Al Foster called The Chief. There's a tune from one of my favorite tenor players, Harold Land, called Vendetta, which is a rhythm changes. That's another of my favorite moments on the record. And then we did this beautiful waltz from John Handy called Dance to the Lady. which is, interestingly enough, I was hip to that by Ray Drummond, interestingly enough. So there's Ray present in this recording in more than one way. That's really
Lessons
nice.
learned.
And then the title track is from Duke Ellington. So songs that you can learn the forms are slightly unusual, but the concept is swinging straight ahead. Get some people who have devoted their lives to swinging, turn them loose, let them have a ball, and see where the communication happens. And it was a great experience.
Okay, very cool. Now, coming up, is it a debut of a new band at Smalls, but it also is incorporating the visual? And maybe speak about that. You're working with a painter, and will she be involved with the performance at Smalls?
So the new band is not brand new, and the idea of synesthesia came back when I met Mary Shah. So she's a painter. Her dealer is called Rick Wester. Sorry, Rick, didn't mean to.
You mean like her art dealer, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of funny because I made that same mistake at Smalls the first time the band played.
You don't want to throw that out. That might be confidential information.
Yes.
Yeah.
Her art dealer is a good friend of mine called Rick Wester. And he invited me to come down and visit his gallery. He's also a saxophonist. He took a few lessons from me. We became friends. And he invited me to come visit his gallery. And the day that I went to visit his gallery, Mary Shah happened to be there. Maybe that was the universe saying, hey, you two ought to meet each other. And we met, and immediately, kind of similar to the first time I played with Gary Smulyan, talking to Mary, it just felt like she was somebody who experiences life in a similar way to me. And we got to talking enough to get around to synesthesia. And actually, it didn't happen that first meeting, but she was setting up some of her paintings, and I just was immediately drawn to her paintings. I liked her paintings a lot. And we left that first meeting getting to know each other a little bit, just sort of with the idea in the air, hey, maybe we could collaborate on something someday. And so it was very open. And then as we talked a little bit more, the word synesthesia came up, and she said, oh, but I have that too. I always paint with music on in the background. And I said, oh, how interesting. Well, would you like it if I sent you some of my music? Would you like to try painting something to some of my music? And she said, yeah, that sounds interesting. Let's do that. So she did. And I loved the result. And I had a gig coming up with Bruce Barth, Ugana Okegwo, and Adam Cruz. I had a gig coming up, this is probably 2 years ago now, at Smalls. And I said, would you like to come down to Smalls and paint while we play? And she said, that sounds like a really interesting idea. She did. And to prepare for that, I did the same thing. I shared with her the cueing system. And we decided for that gig that rather than me cueing and we start out with trying to do something back and forth, our decision for that gig was I would give her the set list with the keys and my color associations with them. So I said, I'll give you this information and then you do whatever you want with it. You can either use it or you can ignore it, and you just paint to the music and see what comes out. And she kind of followed she used it was kind of perfect. She used the information I gave her, and improvised with it. That basically is what it came down to. And she drew a painting per set. So we had, at the end of that 2-night run at Smalls, we had 4 paintings. And I think they sold like right away, which is kind of cool. And so that we've just been continuing that dialogue. We did a presentation together a little while ago where one of the things I did for the audience in that presentation was I read a painting of hers. So I told the audience I was going to start in the upper right-hand corner and follow the color scheme that I was observing in her painting, follow it around, and compose in the colors that I see, in the keys that correspond to the color. So I sort of made up a composition in that presentation. And I haven't gotten around to editing that to put it up on YouTube yet, but that's one of the things we're going to do around the release.
I'd like to check that out. That sounds super interesting. So I got this wrong. Is this quartet going into Smalls in November, Keenan, or this already happened?
So with Mary, we've done a weekend at Smalls and a night at Bar Bayou so far. And the weekend at Smalls coming up again in November this year, the 8th and 9th it is, will be the third time this band has played with Mary in attendance.
Okay. All right.
And the idea is to have this weekend at Smalls be the kind of rehearsal for the recording. And Mary is going to do the artwork for the LP, and I'm not sure if she's going to actually design the whole thing. We haven't actually worked out the details of that yet, but the cover art will certainly be one of the paintings from a composition that I create for the record, or from one of her responses to the sets that we play. So that'll come out sometime next year.
All right. Tim, before I let you go, you spoke about enjoying playing in the trio format a lot. I've been a fan of your playing for several decades, and recently I know that you have been devoting time to the bass clarinet. And I saw recently that maybe you did your first gig solely, exclusively on bass clarinet and trio. So maybe just tell a little bit about the process of adding that instrument to your arsenal, and like where you're going with that's different from where you're going with the tenor.
I love that you asked about that. It's a good story, so I'll tell the story. Sorry if we go a little long, but I have been attracted to the bass clarinet since I moved to New York. Tried some, went sort of into Rod Baltimore when I first got here, and tried a few, and it didn't really take. And then I was in a band with Craig Handy and Robbie Coltrane for a little while in the early part of the new century, and Craig played a lot of bass clarinet on that band, and he let me blow into he had a Yamaha. He let me blow into his horn, and I was like, oh man, I could play this. And then time went by and I still hadn't done it. And COVID happened, and then we, at the rehearsal for my first gig after COVID, it was me and John Ellis playing reeds in Emilio Soja's band. We were practicing to go down to do a gig in Brownsville, Texas, which was my first gig after COVID ended. And at the rehearsal, I said to John Ellis, I said, man, the way you play bass clarinet is so inspiring, man. Every time I hear you play, I just want to pick up that instrument and get started. And then I kind of shook my head and I went, but, man, I think I might not get to it in this lifetime. And John, without missing a beat, goes, man, Tim, there's no guarantee that you're coming back.
Well put.
What a great response. And I'm like, well, yeah, you're right. And the other thing that's holding me back is the $15,000 price tag. And he said, no, man, you can find a bass clarinet for less than that. And he sort of guided me towards a relatively inexpensive Selmer, a low E flat bass clarinet. And I grabbed that, and it didn't cost too much money. And I started blowing into it and fell in love immediately. And long story short, after doing that for a little while, there came a point where I needed to either get that horn repaired because it had some problems, or upgrade to something better. And $10,000, I think, was the next step up at that point, and I couldn't make that happen. But by selling the horn that I had and spending a little more money, I was able to get one called a Royal Polaris, which is a newish brand. Very beautifully made bass clarinet. And I got the low C version and started practicing. So that's 2 years ago. And I've been working pretty hard on that thing. I like to say the bass clarinet has won all of the battles so far, but I aim to win the larger war. I aim to come out victorious. And so the gig that you referenced was with Peter Brendler and Eric Halverson, who are both guys who've come over my house many times over the years to play. And Peter said a little while ago, he said, man, I like the way you play bass clarinet. Maybe we should do a gig, just with trio. And I was like, wow, okay, I'll take that challenge. I'm just going to take that challenge. And we had a handful of rehearsals and found some material that felt suitable. And yeah, so we did the first gig. It was maybe 3 weeks ago at the cafe at Ornithology. And it came out great. I had a ball, and I felt like I didn't embarrass myself. And we had a couple of things that really happened. So it actually got into a deeper zone than I expected to be able to access on that instrument. And so yeah, for the time being, that's my main trio. That when I play trio with those two guys, and there's another bassist called Steve Milhouse who I've been doing some gigs with, and he's an old friend. Actually, I think we might have been introduced by Eric Halverson. So we've done a little bit of trio playing also. There's a couple of different avenues for that, and Emilio Soja has written some bass clarinet parts for me in his new group. So it's just becoming one of the things I do now, which is really fun.
That's super cool. Tim, always great to see you and chat with you. The record is Something About Believing, and you can check out his group Smalls November 8 and 9. Will there be bass clarinet on that weekend?
I'll probably bring it, yeah. Haven't decided yet, but more than likely I'll bring it, yes.
In that case, maybe I'll try to come down then.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh, serious pair of ears in the audience.
Wow, very cool, man. Anyhow, thank you for your time, and we will catch you soon, bro.
Thanks, Dave. Fantastic to hang with you for this last little while.
Yeah. All right, man. Liner Notes is grateful for the support of Van Doren Reeds and Mouthpieces. Be sure and check out the Van Doren Advisory Studio in New York City for all your sound sculpting needs. Liner Notes is grateful for the support of Arlen's Good Beer in Bowling Green, Ohio. Engineered by Marco Mendoza. Visit his website at engineeredbymarco.com. The theme music is Hide, Seek, Find from my record Beatitude, out on Tiger Turn. Produced by David Bixler. Be sure and subscribe to Liner Notes wherever you find your podcasts. If you like what you hear, I ask that you consider supporting Liner Notes financially. You can do this by going to the Liner Notes tab at davidbixler.com. Thank you for your consideration.